This presentation is about tips for editing punctuation. There's a lot that can be said about punctuation, and it can seem a little bit abstract at times and difficult to conceptualize some of these rules, but one helpful way is to take these rules and categorize them into 4 areas. Essentially, we're talking about 4 different marks: commas, semicolons, colons, and then hyphens and or dashes, which are very similar. So we'll group them into these 4, and I'll move as quickly but still coherently as I can through what Chicago has to say about these. So first, commas. So first of all, I think you're familiar with putting the commas between items in a series, and Chicago and many other manuals, with the exception of the Associated Press manual, say to put them between each item. So right there after president. With compound sentences, you have to recall some of your grammar stuff. You have to identify that 2 parts of a sentence have subjects and verbs. We activated the intruder was. And there's a conjunction in the middle, but, and so you need a comma before that conjunction. The key is to identify those parts of the sentence, the subject and the verb. But also note that this plays into the next one, compound predicates. This means that there's only one subject with 2 verbs. He printed and arranged. There's not another subject on that second part of the sentence, so you do not need a comma. It's been misplaced. So look at the edited one. There's only one subject, he, and he did 2 things. He printed and he arranged. So there, obviously you could add a subject to that second part and make it a compound sentence, but this is a common issue where people will put a comma right there for a compound predicate. Keep an eye out for that. Again, you have to know some grammar to identify where to place a comma with an introductory dependent clause. If you accept our conditions, comma, we shall agree to the proposal. When it's before the main sentence, we shall agree, then you have to put a comma there. This one's a little tricky, the restrictive clause, and this is when information is extra. In this case, the clause which was well formatted has the relative pronoun which, and it's always which when it's restrictive, because it's extra information about that manuscript, and so you need to bracket it in with commas there. So often these will be missing and the editor needs to apply them. But sometimes the commas are misplaced because this information is not restrictive, it's non-restrictive. That is to say, it's essential to the meaning of the sentence. The manuscript that the editor submitted to the publisher was well formatted. Notice with non-restrictive we use that, not which. This is an important rule to remember, when to use that and when to use which. And for that, you want to use it when it's essential to the meaning of the sentence, because in this sentence we're talking about a very specific manuscript. It's the one that the editor submitted to the publisher. And because it's essential, you do not need commas. And so when people put them there, you need to remove them. One helpful little phrase that you can put in your head is comma which, comma which, comma which. And it sounds weird, but when you put that in your head, you note that when you see which, you need a comma with it. Now, then you have to decide whether it should be which or that, but essentially that helps you remember if the comma goes there. Introductory adverbial phrases. With 3 consecutive swings, Jackson made history. You do need to have a comma there because it helps with clarity, though you could see 631 for some exceptions. Introductory adverbial phrases will do things like state when it happened. In 1936, something, something, something. And in that case, that might be an exception because it's so short, but still, it's an introductory adverbial phrase, and it might help just to put the comma. Missing commas with coordinating adjectives. There are 2 qualities to this friend, faithful and sincere, and they're called coordinating adjectives, so you need to put the comma between the 2, faithful and sincere. Missing commas with conjunctive adverbs. I know that's a bit technical, but essentially a conjunctive adverb is a word like however or therefore, or that is, and you need them there if they're going to be there to interrupt the flow of the sentence. A truly efficient gasoline-powered engine remains, however, a pipe dream. Now for semicolons. Semicolons exist to join 2 independent clauses or 2 complete sentences, and it's when they're closely related. And in this case, you just put them there. If you're having difficulty with semicolons, best not to use them, but also interrogate whenever you see an author using them and ensure they're using them correctly. If there's two independent clauses being joined together with a comma, you can replace it with a period and make it two sentences, or replace it with a comma and some conjunction, or you can replace it with a semicolon because they're joining two independent sentences. Missing semicolon with conjunctive adverbs in a joined independent clause. This is a common error. The trumpet player developed a painful cold sore. Therefore, plans for a third show were scrapped. It's a common error to use commas by accident, but those are two independent sentences. Look at the structure. Player developed, plans were scrapped. Two independent sentences. So we need to put a semicolon, because yes, they are closely related, but you still need that comma, as with the previous rule we talked about, after that conjunctive adverb, therefore. So keep an eye out for that, for when they use therefore and then they need a semicolon with it. Another one is that is, or for example. Similar rule as the previous one. You need that semicolon because they are two independent sentences. Kiesler managed, he introduced. That is that conjunctive phrase there. And so you need a semicolon before it because you're introducing two independent clauses. Complex series. This is when you have a series that has lots of components to it. So look at this. Marilyn, Sunita, and Jared, research assistants. Carlos, programming consultant, and Carol, audiovisual editor, provided support and prepared materials. That's a bit complex, that series, because it not only includes the names, it includes their role or their title. And so what they suggest is Marilyn, Sunita, and Jared, research assistants, semicolon, Carlos, programming consultant, semicolon, and Carol, audiovisual editor, comma, provided support and prepared these materials for publication. Essentially, these semicolons are useful for making the series a little easier to understand. Similarly, with the numbers of the scores for each of those, or the number of membership for each of those countries, it just clarifies by adding the semicolon instead of having a whole bunch of commas. Now for colons. They can be used much like semicolons to join two independent clauses. In this case, Yolanda faced a conundrum. She could finish the soup, pretending not to care that what she had thought until a moment ago was vegetable broth was in fact made from chicken. These are closely related. Yolanda faced a conundrum. She could finish the soup. So in between the two, they put a colon to join them in meaning, but not necessarily, because the grammar would require that there be some independence to each of them. Whenever you see a list being introduced with as follows or the following, you need a colon. But sometimes colons are misplaced because they're put there when people see the word include or including or some other verb form. The steps are, colon, and that's incorrect. This is just a complete sentence, so get rid of it. The steps include, colon, that's incorrect too. Just complete the sentence. But another way to edit it is the steps are as follows, going back to the previous rule. Now for hyphens and dashes. Number ranges, 1993 to 2000. Often people will unintentionally use a hyphen, but that's not what it should be. For number ranges, you need an N dash. And an N dash is created with different commands on the keyboard, and you can see them right there in the pop-up. But you need an N dash, EN, for the number ranges. Sometimes people will need to expand on a thought, and you do that with an M dash, which is longer than an N dash. And you can see there, it was a revival of the most potent image in modern democracy. And then somebody put a hyphen, when what they should have done was used an M dash. And now you can see on the screen the command for the keyboard, depending on your platform, for creating an M dash. Look at the other examples. So an M dash is there to provide explanatory content, but the issue is that people will use hyphens. What are hyphens for anyway? Well, they're for phone numbers or some other basic functions like that, but essentially what you need to keep in mind are the two additional dashes that are out there. Also, hyphens are used for compound modifiers after a noun. It'd be misplaced because it should be only used when it's before a noun. It turned out his project was book length. Well, actually, you don't need a hyphen there because it's completing the predicate. The project was book length. However, look at this one on the next line. When it comes before the noun, you do need a hyphen. You see the difference there. It's before the noun, book length project. Often people will unintentionally put a hyphen because they think they're following the rule of the previous one, but actually when it's an adverb that ends in ly, you don't need one. So in this case, it turned out his project was largely irrelevant. Well, you don't need the hyphen there. It turned out his largely irrelevant project had impact. You don't need it there either because it's an adverb ending in ly. Notice that this is tipping over into chapter 7, but that's where they do discuss spelling and hyphen use. Also, missing hyphen and suspended expressions. What you have is a phrase where you have an expression that's been suspended over the course of a conjunction. They decided on 15 and 20-year mortgages. Well, that's missing a hyphen after 15 because it's the 15-year mortgage concept has been suspended because you have the conjunction and the number 20 in between it. So you need a hyphen on that first part too. Also, there are various situations where for spelling purposes you need a hyphen, and I highly recommend you consult Chicago 7, paragraph 89, where it has a very helpful guide for different instances in which you might need a hyphen for spelling. So I acknowledge that that was pretty quick. What you'll see attached to this are these lecture slides, so you can have them as a cheat sheet instead of having to go through Chicago one by one, and you can study them for yourself, but hopefully that overview gave you the guidance that you might need for editing punctuation.